What's up everyone, Brandon here from Gearist. And today we're going to be looking at the technical trail monster, the Speedcross Pro from Salomon. The Salomon Speedcross 3 is a shoe that has been around forever. In fact, we reviewed it all the way back in 2012. Now while this might not seem forever, generally speaking, in shoe years, since there's typically like a 12-month or less renewal kind of strategy a lot of the time, that is a long time for a particular model to be around, because after all, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This year, however, Salomon has decided to update the Speedcross line in both the Speedcross 4, which is coming, we're talking about the Speedcross Pro today, and the Speedcross Pro, as well as the S-Lab Speed, which we're not talking about today. To give a little bit of primer on how the Salomon lines work, you've got the S-Lab line, which is the most technical, most expensive, most lightweight most of the time. You've got the next line, the Pro line, which is where this guy falls in, and then you've got kind of the regular line down here. All of these shoes are super high quality most of the time, not the cheapest things in the world either. All this to say, today we're taking a look at the 2016 Speedcross Pro. So let's get into it. The outsole of this guy has always been a pretty straightforward shoe. There's not a lot of different arrangements and things that are going on, and if you notice, you'll look at that, it looks pretty similar to the Speedcross 3, but there are some pretty key changes. But first, let's talk about the things that have not changed. Number one, the lug layout and pattern on this guy is pretty much the same in that it's always been directionally arranged. So the rear of the shoe is optimized for descending, the front of the shoe is optimized for ascending. These are also 6mm deep chevron shaped lugs, which you can see right there. So those things have not changed, and there's still Contagrip, though a changed Contagrip on the bottom of this guy, which is the type of rubber that Salomon is using here. But what has changed? Well, the first thing is that one of the issues that people had with the Speedcross 3 is that some of the perimeter lugs, the ones that were right around the outside here, would get cut in half because it looked like basically they had a sheet of rubber with lugs all over it, and they would just cut them at a certain spot. So what you would wind up with is kind of half lugs on the outside or the medial side or what have you. You wind up half lugs or 3/4 lugs or 2/3 or whatever. And you can see actually an image right here of the Speedcross 3 versus the Speedcross 4, which gives you a good example, or rather the Speedcross Pro, which gives you a good example, an idea of what I mean by having lugs cut off. But what's wrong with that, you might ask? Well, the first thing is that without all that rubber there, you can compromise the structural integrity of the lug itself. So this means that if you're running and there's not the full structure of the chevron to support it, you're going to torque that lug a little bit. In some cases, it could even shear off, but more than that, what's going to happen is you're going to wear those perimeter lugs on those earlier models of shoes a little bit more quickly, and this would in turn compromise the traction and the overall performance of the shoe. However, in the Speedcross Pro for 2016, as well as the new Speedcross 4, this has been really changed a lot, and so it's very imperceptible actually looking at it, but you can see that all the lugs that we see here are the full chevron shape with nothing being cut off. Traction in the shoe is really built for climbing technical trails, and it does a bang up job doing it. It really sticks, especially in some more loose and dirty stuff. And actually this is kind of built for mud and some snow and some wet terrain and things like that. And it really does a good job of not holding on to too much mud, because again, you can see how widely spaced all this is while still giving great traction in situations like that. Another big change for this outsole, which you can't really see with the naked eye, is the updated Contagrip rubber. This is Salomon's new mud and snow Contagrip, which is specifically made to grip in, as you would guess, by the name mud and snow. I had a chance to try out this new rubber side by side with the earlier model of the Contagrip, and I have to tell you that the amount of grip difference on a wet surface, I was on a wet polished granite surface, is amazing. And I have run in this shoe right here in muddy conditions, in snowy conditions, but I've certainly also done it in trail dry conditions, and it does a fantastic job. It's really very impressive. Not the stickiest rubber I've ever felt, but certainly right up there, easily top 2 or 3. I have to admit to you guys that when I see something as luggy as this, again 6mm deep lugs, or in some cases even deeper than these in shoes we've reviewed in the past, I'm a little bit skeptical about how the durability is going to work out. But in this case, this thing has 60 miles on it, which if you know, you watch our channel a lot, you know that we usually only put about 40 miles on it, but since I'm ramping up training for Trans Rockies, I've got quite a few more miles on this. And I don't know if you'll be able to see, but with 60 miles on this, there's very, very little wear. I mean, you can see abrasions that you would expect to see, but with 60 miles purely on trail, no roads in there, this thing is really just holding up extraordinarily well. The midsole of this shoe is using two main components to it, and that is injected EVA foam as well as Salomon's LT muscle, lightweight muscle that sits back here. Obviously, both of these provide protection, but the LT muscle is meant to provide that protection and cushioning with a bit of flexibility, with actually quite a bit of flexibility, especially up in the forefoot. It does stiffen up in the midfoot because there's a lot of material underfoot here, but it doesn't really do anything to diminish the ride very much. We'll talk about that, of course, in the ride section coming up. And while I will leave much of the ride detail to the ride section, let's talk about the geometry, because I do think that that informs the way that this shoe fits and feels quite a bit. First, the stack heights in this guy come in at 30 millimeters in the heel and 20 millimeters in the forefoot for a net drop of 10 millimeters. Now, this is 4 millimeters above my preferred 6 millimeter and under thing that I really like, but it doesn't really affect me very much because this is a shoe, and most trail shoes are like this, where if you're on trail, you probably spend much more time up on the forefoot or at least the midfoot, and so you don't really feel as affected by that on the trail like you would on the road. Now, with that said, I will say that the heel, there's a lot of volume back here that I don't think is really entirely necessary. Now, the first thing is that if you're a hardcore heel striker, you may be able to take advantage of this, but first, why? Second, if you can't really run up a hill while nailing the crap out of your heel, but if you can, please send me a video. I'd like to see that. Again, if that's the case, you may get some use out of this, but for me, I feel like there's just a lot of material that adds weight back here, and it's quite bulky. It didn't really affect me so much, but you certainly do notice that bulk underfoot, and I feel like by shaving a little bit of this material, maybe around this area, and maybe bringing that drop down just a few millimeters, that stack rather, you're going to be able to get a little more kind of enhanced ground feel, get under that 6 millimeter line that I like, but still have that amazing integrity of the structure of the shoe back here. Some of the biggest changes in the Speedcross Pro from the Speedcross 3 come in the upper right here. And the first is these welded overlays that basically envelop the entire shoe. Much of this is part of the SensiFit system, which you've seen us talk about in Salomon running shoes in the past, which does a great job of cradling, especially that midfoot, giving a nice sense of lockdown. And I feel like with these bonded overlays or welded overlays, you get an even closer sense of that. It really hugs the foot very, very well. And if you look closely, one of the cool things about this is that these overlays that come right here, they wrap fully down over the midsole. So you've got this mud and kind of debris protection all the way down. So basically, you don't really see the midsole in this portion, the front 2/3 of the shoe. You only see it kind of back here because it's covered by this material, and it does a great job of keeping debris out, of keeping mud off, and it's kind of plasticky, so it rinses off really well. Underlying all that welded goodness right here is the main mesh of this guy, which is amazing for debris. It's also water resistant, not waterproof, but water resistant. And despite being a very, very tight weave, which again keeps out all those things, has a pretty decent degree of breathability for what it is, but not a ton of breathability. Adding even a little more debris protection is this tongue cover, which we can see right here. It's kind of a stretch piece, kind of almost an external gusset that goes underneath the laces, but over top of that tongue and keeps further debris from coming out this way. Keeping that foot tied down in place is Salomon's quick lace system. We see right here, easy, just kind of pull it up, tighten that down, and then you've of course got the lace pocket right up here, which does a nice job of being able to hold those laces down so you don't exactly have to worry about this going all over the place or what have you. These laces run through a gilly lacing setup, which you can see right there, which keeps them nicely attached right into that SensiFit system, that system again that ties all the way down throughout the whole shoe. On the interior of this guy, you've got Salomon's EndoFit system, which is basically a booty kind of construction. It's not a full booty. It basically is right over the midfoot, just right about like here, which is a gentle elastic sleeve that holds the foot nicely in place. We've talked about this before in that cradling sense that it gives you is really, really awesome. As I alluded to earlier, all these overlays come down and they actually integrate directly into this toe cap, which is not the hardest thing in the world, but it provides a great amount of protection and also gives a nice shape to this toe box, which we'll touch on in the fit a little bit because Salomon tends to be on the narrower side. So to have a well-shaped vertically, especially especially toe box in this, is a really big advantage. At the rear of the shoe, the heel counter is actually quite rigid. It gives a lot of stability back here, which kind of does a nice job of countering the fact that you're sitting up so high and there's this extra bulk back here. Does a good job of that, and also not only is it reinforced by the actual rigidity of the heel counter itself, but you've also got these overlays, which you can see fully extend all the way back here, as well as some of this midsole material which comes up. So the foot actually sits down kind of on this line down here, not up on this line up here. For me, the upper is held up extremely well, even in places where I would expect it to break down a little bit. Right here, there's a seam where it tends to fold, but there is zero picking at all, zero pulling away of the overlays or anything like that. And I've gotten quite a few miles on this that are really nasty miles. And apart from a little bit of dust, which you can see here kind of embedded in here thanks to some very fine Colorado dust, which tends to get in there and not get out, it comes clean very well. I mean, this thing has been dirty, but it has come clean really well. And one of the things I really like about this upper is that integrated feel. And again, I feel like that's largely part of the fact that all these overlays, which go from the top of the heel counter back here up into the gilly lacing around the quick lace system, all the way down just above, over top of the midsole, in fact, just above the outsole, is a huge advantage for having this kind of cohesive feel underfoot. So here's the thing about the fit of Salomon shoes is that they tend to run narrow. If you've ever run in a pair of their shoes, you've probably noticed this to some degree. This is not always the case for the most part, but it can be a trick to get used to that more Euro fit in these guys. For me, the Speedcross Pro really isn't narrow. It does run just on this side of average, but it is a little more narrow. So if you've got a wide foot, finding something that's going to fit you one of these sizes may be a little bit tricky. For me, it feels more like a race-tuned shoe than something that just actually runs narrow. So it's more like that racing flat feel. Now, keep in mind that if you're going to get this shoe, if you've got a foot that you are questioning whether it's going to fit in here, you can go to your local run shop that carries Salomon, or if you prefer to shop online, you can do that. And a lot of online retailers these days will take back a shoe even if it's been run in. So definitely check the return exchange policy just to make sure you're covered. As for sizing, while some people may try to go up a half size to account for that different fit in there, for me, I felt totally fine in my size 11s, no questions at all. The ride to Speedcross Pro is probably one of the most interesting and kind of this weird cognitive dissonance that I felt in a while. On the one hand, with stack heights of 30 and 20 millimeters, I would expect a little more cush and comfort during those cruisy miles. Don't get me wrong though, this does well and I felt perfectly fine on that. I just expected a little more cush, which isn't necessarily something that I always reach for, but it is something to consider because again, this is a technical trail shoe, particularly tuned to climbing. Don't get me wrong though, this does well and I felt perfectly fine on that. I just expected a little more cush, which isn't necessarily something that I always reach for, but it is something to consider because again, this is a technical trail shoe, particularly tuned to climbing. On more technical trail, whether that's rocky terrain or loose terrain or wet terrain or what have you, I feel like this thing tore it up. That is where this shoe lives. There is no rock plate on the shoe, but I felt like between the stack height and the lug kind of depth keeping the things underfoot at bay, I felt perfectly protected. Didn't really notice anything. And in fact, other shoes that have rock plate, I felt less protected sometimes than I did in this. So that was really an advantage. Ground feel is actually pretty good in this shoe. And for the weight of this shoe, while not light, which I'll touch on in a minute, it certainly felt quite agile on my foot. It didn't feel very clunky, except for every now and then, just I noticed that there was more material in the rear foot than there needed to be, in my opinion. Now that weight, this guy in my size 11 comes in at 12.8 ounces. If a men's size 9, just to give you a better barometer, comes in 11.4 ounces. I think there are plenty of places to be able to shave weight in this. Easily save 2 ounces by shaving down some of this material here, cutting that drop down, and maybe even making the foam up and around the collar a little less thick. I think there's an easy way to be able to trim some weight off the shoe, easily 2 ounces probably. Now, maybe that's what they've done in the S-Lab Speed, haven't tried that yet, but if it is, we will certainly let you know. And I should also mention that I think that you could do these things without really sacrificing the structural integrity of the shoe, which is important because that is the key to the shoe. That is what the ride and what the experience is all about. There is a very good reason why the Speedcross 3 and probably the Speedcross 4 and the Speedcross Pro have been and will be, continue to be such popular shoes. shoes, and that's because of the amazing pedigree and the build quality of these things. Every now and then I do see people running in this in just groomed trails, and that's all they run in. This is probably overkill for that. So, make sure that you've got the trail to run in this. I think that anybody that's got any sort of kind of climby stuff or a particularly loose terrain, particularly like something like the Pacific Northwest or the East Coast where you've got those kind of rutted forests where you might have some moss on the ground and some really kind of dirty things that you need that grip, this is going to be very good. On groomed paths and things like this, not really the shoe for that. It's overkill. I mean, it's like getting a Ferrari to go pick up your kids from school. I'm impressed with the changes and updates to this guy, and the price tag, while not the cheapest thing in the world for $150, that's really not bad for Salomon, number one. And number two, for a technical trail shoe of this quality, that's actually, again, pretty acceptable. I'd like to see it come down a little more, about that below that 125 range, but again, really solid shoe for the money. Before our question of the day, guys, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We have just passed 10,000 subscribers, and that is so awesome. I'm so excited. We're about 1.2 million views on YouTube. It is so fantastic. Thank you to all those of you that have supported. Please continue. Please share our channel with your friends. It means a lot. And now, here's our question of the day for you, and that is, since the Speedcross 3 has been around for so long, and as we've mentioned, have you tried it? What did you think of the Speedcross 3, and what could make you go to the Speedcross 4 or the Speedcross Pro? Please leave your answers down in the comments section below. Guys, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us today. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to visit Gearist.com or email info@Gearist. We'd be happy to answer your questions. And if you'd like to ask those questions out in the public sphere, you can follow us on all of our social media outlets, which you see here on my right, your left, including Strava, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Follow us on Instagram @Gearist, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. That means a lot and helps hugely support our channel. Once again, guys, have fun out there. Hashtag all your pictures in Instagram and Twitter posts with hashtag I'm a Gearist, and thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time.